Before we get started painting the textures for our monster, we need to take a moment to get the UV snapshot from our 3D application into Photoshop, so we can then use that UV snapshot as a basis for creating our textures. Okay, so in this case, the 3D application that we're going to be using is Maya. Okay, and if you're using Maya, you can go ahead and open up the texturing start.ma. Okay, and that'll be our starting scene that we're going to be working with. Okay, so selecting this object, this is a subdivision surface. So we can take a look at the UV snapshot of this object by going up to Window, and then about halfway down, you can look at the UV texture editor. Okay, and now you can see the UV layout that we created for this monster in an earlier kit. Okay, from this point, you have really one of two options as a way of getting this texture back into Photoshop. You can either go up to Polygons and select the UV snapshot, which if you click on that, you now have the option to determine where that file is going to go and what the name is going to be, what the size of this texture is going to be once it's imported into Photoshop. You can choose the file format, and you can also choose what color the wireframe is going to be when this comes into Photoshop. Okay, so that's one way to do that through the UV snapshot. Another option that you have if you're using Maya 6.0 or later is, let's go ahead and open up the Hypershade. Okay, and like I said, if you're running Maya 6.0 or later, within the Hypershade, if you go to Edit, you should see an option called Create Photoshop Document Texture. Okay, this is the option that we're going to be using. And this option will work if you're using, I believe it's Photoshop 6 or later. If you're using anything earlier than version 6, I'm not sure if this Create PSD Texture will work. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is let's assign a new material to our monster. Okay, so in this case I'm just going to use a blend, and we can go ahead and name this something like Monster Body. Okay, now let's go ahead and select this surface, and we can go up to Edit, and let's create a PSD texture. Okay, and when you click on that, it brings up this window, which will give you a few options to choose from. So in the image name, we can choose exactly where we want this to go. Okay, so I'm going to create it, or I'm going to add this to my textures folder, and I'll just call this Monster Body. Okay, now that will be the name of the Photoshop document that we can open. You can set the size for this, and since I want this to be a fairly detailed texture, I'm going to go ahead and set this to a pretty large size, in this case 2048. Okay, we can select the attributes that we want to add to this texture that we're going to be making. So let's add color. I also would like this creature to be able to have a bump map. So let's go ahead and add a bump map. And I want to be able to add some specular color to this creature at some point in time. So I'll add that. Okay, so let's go ahead and just work with these three attributes for our monster. You can set, right in here, you can set what color the wireframe is going to be once this comes into Photoshop. I'm going to go ahead and just leave this white. White seems to be a pretty good color. Okay, so once we've got all this set, we can create. Okay, and give it just a moment to compute this. Okay, so if you take a look in your Hypershade, here's what you wind up with. Here's what Maya's done. It's gone ahead and basically automatically made these three different images, which are all part of the same Photoshop document. Okay, so what we can do is if we take a look at Photoshop, let's go ahead and open, and here is the Monster Body Photoshop document that we just made. Okay, so if we open this, here's what we've got, ready to be painted on. And the reason that this works with Photoshop 6 or later is because this creates what are called layer sets. And so you have one layer set for the body color, one layer set for the bump, one for the specular, and whatever other attributes you decided to add. And layer sets are a feature that are new in Photoshop version 6. So anything newer than or anything older than 6, I'm not sure how well that works. Okay, so now that we've got this brought into Photoshop, we're ready to go ahead and start painting, which we can get started on in our next video.